Hi, my name is Rose Wynn. I am the Natural Resources Consultant for California Four-Wheel Drive Association. I'd like to share some information about the 30 by 30 initiative and why it matters for off-highway vehicle or OHV recreation, why it matters to us here in Cal Four-Wheel Association. 30 by 30 is a big initiative that has been going on for many, many years. The goal is to conserve 30% of the world's land and water by the year 2030. This initiative has been backed by proponents at the global, national, and state levels. A major driving mechanism behind conversion of America's public lands from multiple use context to wildlands without human access is the 30 by 30 initiative. So in this talk, I will share a little bit about the details behind 30 by 30 and how it's been implemented in the United States and California so far. 30 by 30 originated, as mentioned, as a global initiative. And this is a map that was actually presented to the United Nations during an early conversation about 30 by 30 in 2004. This represents part of the grand scheme, the vision of what 30 by 30 would accomplish, which would create core reservoirs and corridors that would include little or no human use, as well as buffer zones around those reserves and corridors that would have highly regulated use. There would be, of course, some land designated for normal use, and you can see that in green on the map. And this would create a composite of the nation as a whole. Clearly, this is a major initiative and it wouldn't be widely adopted by many among the public. And so it has unrolled in a smaller piece by piece fashion. The current version is 30 by 30, but we should also be aware that if and when the goals of 30 by 30 are achieved, there's already in existing framework and infrastructure to implement 40 by 40, which would be 40% of lands conserved by 2040, as well as 50 by 50, which is 50% of lands conserved by 2050. And really, it's the 50 by 50 goal that's represented primarily in the map that's shown here. So we're well on our way to achieving that in the United States, and we'll again look at how some of that has been folded out. So land and travel management planning is a big component of the piecework of the 30 by 30 initiative. Some examples we've seen of this in recent travel and land management plans include those occurring at Red Rock Canyon State Park, Oceano Dunes SVRA, National Forest land management planning, including the recent records of decision released for Sierra and Sequoia National Forest, travel planning like the Sierra National Forest Motorized Recreation Plan, and travel planning in other states such as Moab, Utah, with the Labyrinth Rim and Gemini Bridges travel management plan. There's many, many more examples, but these are a few that you may be familiar with and hit close to home in regard to issues that we've been involved with at Cal Four-Wheel over the last couple of years. For an example of Red Rock Canyon State Park General Plan update and how this unfolded in that land management planning, that state park did have OHV recreation historically. And there were some hallmark routes that many people enjoyed, including Nightmare Gulch, shown here in the center oval, as well as Black Rock Canyon in the left circle, and El Paseo Trail, shown on the right oval. These trails have been restricted or closed down for various purposes over the last few years, but those closures were made permanent through the most recent update to the Red Rock Canyon State Park General Plan. Nightmare Gulch especially was contentious as a possibility for closure, given that the original closure occurred due to claims of damage from weather events. Anybody who's followed the history of this particular trail knows that those damages could have been easily mitigated, but state parks chose not to. And as we learned over time, it was because this trail was indeed already slated for closure in the general plan update that was finalized in 2023. So this gives an example of how this bigger agenda has been driving smaller, localized decisions in a variety of our public lands over the last many years. Another example is, of course, Oceano Dunes SVRA. We've seen a longstanding battle for this particular state park entity as well. We've had ongoing efforts by the San Luis Obispo Air Pollution Control District and the California Coastal Commission to either restrict or shut down completely both OHV recreation and camping. The goal, as we've seen unfold, has been to remove human access and recreational access and convert this land to more of a preserved status. We've seen expansion of the snowy plover protections, which have impinged on the footprint of where OHV recreation and camping can take place. And we've seen reductions, either seasonal or permanent, in regard to the number of people just generally permitted to access the SVRA on a day-to-day basis. So while no one has come out and explicitly said that the efforts to shut down Oceano Dunes SVRA are tied to 30 by 30, the pattern of methodology and the tactics used mirror those that are taking place across California and across the US in other efforts to expand 30 by 30. So the tie there is quite known. Yet another example comes from the recent revised land management plans for Sierra and Sequoia National Forest. Many of you are familiar with the Pacific Crest Trail, which is an absolutely beautiful hiking and horseback riding trail that runs up the full length of California from the Mexican border to Oregon and continues on through Oregon and Washington to the Canadian border. That trail, by definition, is a National Historic Scenic Trail. That's for foot traffic or horseback traffic, and the designated width of the trail is 30 feet or 15 feet from center point. However, in this most recent update to the land management planning for both Sierra and Sequoia National Forest, those forest supervisors implemented creation of a 1 mile wide corridor around the Pacific Crest Trail. While this corridor doesn't explicitly exclude OHV recreation from taking place within the corridor, we know that that is the end goal given the language of how the corridor was described in the draft and the final plan. And we've seen how creation of this corridor has already impacted travel management planning in specific areas of the forest, such as in Sequoia National Forest. The Paiute Trail system is now facing risk of being reduced, if not closed in some areas, because of the overlap between that trail system and this newly created corridor for the PCT. So the purpose of the corridor is to enhance wilderness characteristics and to preserve an experience of solitude for hikers. And solitude comes about through lack of noise or interruption or motorized vehicles and other sources of what may be deemed impingements on wilderness characteristics within that area. So we are battling this through Cal 4-Wheel, and you'll hear more about that from my reports and updates as natural resources consultant. But this is another example fresh at hand in regard to how 30 by 30 has been implemented in a variety of ways. Yet one other way is through proposed rules. And recently we had the Bureau of Land Management release the proposed Conservation and Landscape Health Rule. In this rule, BLM seeks to give themselves authority to sell our public lands as conservation leases, whereas those leases would be permanent land holdings by the leaseholder. There'd be no expiration date, and the lease owner would be granted managing authority of that land. So it would be up to the leaseholder if they wanted to continue OHV recreation, if there were existing trails that ran through the borders of the land that they lease, or if they wanted to discontinue that or any other use, they would have the discretion to do so. This is entirely illegal. It does not comply with the way that Bureau of Land Management is directed to manage our public lands through their congressionally granted authorities. However, that hasn't stopped the BLM from trying to push this through. And again, this is a representation of the broader 30 by 30 initiative. So this is another issue that we are fighting through Cal Wheel. And again, you'll hear more to come on that in the months to follow. Other initiatives that support 30 by 30 include wilderness, monument, and sanctuary designations. These are scattered throughout the United States, but we've seen many of them right here in California with expansion of wilderness boundaries, creation of faux wilderness or wilderness by name alone, such as wilderness study areas and areas with wilderness characteristics. We have multiple new proposed monuments slated for California, including Range of Light, Feather River Canyon, and Chuckwalla, with an expansion to Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument also in the works. Additionally, we have some interesting progression with the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary. In regard to monuments, one of the largest that's currently proposed is the Range of Light Monument, which would extend from the border of Yosemite National Park all the way down to the border of Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Park, comprising a total footprint of land of 1.4 million acres. This would swallow all of Sierra National Forest into monument status and bring in other lands from Inyo National Forest and other pieces of Sequoia National Forest into monument status. So it's a huge piece between Range of Light, Feather River Canyon, and Chuckwalla. We would nearly double the number of acres in monument status in California if those designations are approved. Additionally, this interesting piece of development with the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary demonstrates 30 by 30 efforts in that it would create a 5,600 square mile region that includes primarily ocean water, but also the shoreline of where those waters fall along the central coast of California. It would run up against the border of the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, which is an existing sanctuary, and go all the way down the coast to just north of Santa Barbara and the Channel Islands. Oceano Dunes SBRA would share a shoreline with the sanctuary. And so while the sanctuary is proposed, it is anticipated by all the authorities that it will be approved, perhaps in 2024 or 2025. And then we'll see what kind of fallout may come from that sanctuary status and the shorelines that it shares. The Endangered Species Act is another mechanism to achieve 30 by 30, and we've seen the creation of designated critical habitat for creatures that are proposed or already listed under the Endangered Species Act reduce or eliminate public land access and replicate the creation of these corridors and reserves that we saw on that map at the start of this discussion. Species can be listed both under the Federal Endangered Species Act and the California Endangered Species Act. So we kind of have a double whammy here in California where our sources of listing can come from two channels. And some recent examples have included the foothill yellow-legged frog, the California spotted owl, the western toad, Sierra fisher, sage grouse, and of course, Joshua trees and the Clear Lake hitch. With the Joshua tree, an interesting thing happened in that the California Fish and Game did propose to advance this listing for approval. However, they could not gain a unanimous vote from the commission board members to approve that as a listed species. And so California took the matter into their own hands and created a budget trailer bill in 2023, which assigned Endangered Species Act-like protections to the Joshua tree through a bill, a piece of legislation for the state of California. This bill was passed in 2023, and now Joshua trees are protected permanently as if they are an endangered species. So this is a curious piece about the 30 by 30 initiative, where now we're seeing efforts that haven't been successful through traditional methods, like the Endangered Species Act, being advanced through alternative methods that very largely broach on overstep of authority by our federal, state, and local governments. The Clear Lake hitch is another example. This is a fish that lives in Clear Lake, California, up in the northern part of our state. And while it has not been officially listed as an endangered species, it has been assigned Endangered Species Act-like protections through executive orders from Governor Newsom. We have some trails in Northern California that fall into the watershed that feeds into Clear Lake and have experienced some seasonal closures due to water flow. And so we'll be watching this closely, as there may be issues that we'll need to battle through Cal 4-Wheel in order to maintain trails as open and accessible, despite where they may fall within the Clear Lake hitch habitat. California has its own 30 by 30 plan on top of the federal 30 by 30 plan. Governor Newsom created this plan through executive order. And if we were to achieve 30% of our lands conserved in the state by 2030, we would have to set aside over 750,000 acres per year, every year leading up to 2030. So even though, as shown on this map, they estimate that we have just over 24% of our lands already conserved, we still have a very vast number, volume of acres that would need to be conserved to reach that goal of 30%. 30 by 30 funding from the state of California incentivize our counties and cities to adopt 30 by 30 policies. And in so doing, our taxpayer funds are essentially being used to advance the 30 by 30 agenda. The proposed Chumash, I already spoke about that one. So where can you learn more about 30 by 30? The American Stewards of Liberty provides a wealth of information and resources on 30 by 30, and they really have some great, easy to digest information and videos and articles where you can dive into more details and learn more about them. One thing I didn't mention earlier with the Bureau of Land Management's proposed Conservation and Landscape Health Rule is the recent creation of natural asset companies, which forms kind of a dirty underbelly to the proposed rule. Natural asset companies would create a mechanism for our public lands to be traded on the stock market. And there are some pretty alarming recent developments where we know that there are already official designations for specific national parks, national monuments, and other public land areas created and staged and ready to go for active trading on the stock market. So American Stewards of Liberty has some more information that's really easy to access on natural asset companies if you'd like to learn more about that specifically, as well as information that can help you gain an informed position on how to get involved in your local area and how to involve your county level political representatives who are becoming more and more instrumental as partners for us to fight 30 by 30 at the local level. So things that you can do to stay informed or to help with the 30 by 30 battle include staying informed on local and state issues, joining the Cal 4-Wheel Access and Stewardship Committee, which meets every month on the second Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. I lead that with a number of other members of Cal 4-Wheel, and we discuss issues going on in various pockets of the state, as well as take action on call and comment opportunities on specific issues at hand. You could share that information that you're learning through Cal 4-Wheel with your clubs, friends, family, and neighbors, and spread the word from Cal 4 through our advocacy posts, emails, and social media. Please do join in our written comment and call campaigns for issues as they come up, and recruit your friends and your club members to comment and call as well. Joining in or starting an Adopt a Trail program is a great way to preserve our trails and help push back at the local level on 30 by 30, as well as getting acquainted with your local county board of supervisors and your regional public land agency representatives. Attending meetings with your board of supervisors and your local agencies is also very important. And finally, actually speaking at those meetings that you attend to share concerns about access issues or closures or restrictions that you're seeing in your area really takes that value of attending to its highest value. Other ways that you can get involved in issues in your local area include getting engaged directly, finding out who's involved, what the specifics are, where the actions are taking place and what trails are implicated, when closures are happening, and how those closures are being implemented and what we may be able to do to resolve them. If ever you'd like support, I'm more than happy to help, especially if you have information like this to reach out and share, then we may be able to take some action together and fight on this as a broader association. And you can always get others in your club involved with you as well. So that concludes a bit of overview about 30 by 30 and how it impacts us in the off-highway vehicle recreation industry and at Cal 4-Wheel. If you have questions or if you'd like to chat further about any of these things, please feel free to reach out to me anytime. I have my email here shown on the screen, and I'll look forward to continuing to work with you and everyone in Cal 4-Wheel as we fight to keep our public land access open.